Hey there, it's Melissa Brunetti, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Karma podcast. Hey there, Karma Crew. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Mind Your Own Karma. My guest today is Joan K. Peters. She isn't just a writer, she's a brave excavator of the soul. A professor emeritus with a PhD in comparative literature from the University of Chicago, Joan spent years teaching others to analyze great stories until she found herself inside one of her own. In Untangling, a memoir of psychoanalysis, she pulls back the curtain on decades of therapy, dream work, and quiet but profound trauma. It's a rare and raw look at what it really takes to heal. She now lives in Ojai, California with her husband, some dogs, and a few chickens who've probably heard all of it. It's time to rip off the bandage on psychoanalysis with Joan K. Peters. We are welcoming Joan Peters to the show today. Hi, Joan.
Hi, nice to be here.
Nice to meet you finally. I'm super excited to dive into psychoanalysis. I never really thought about how it was different from traditional therapy, so I'm super excited to learn that part and how it brought you profound healing as well. But first, you wrote a book called Untangling, and you describe it as a memoir and a journey through psychoanalysis. Talk about your journey, your personal journey in seeking psychoanalysis. Why did you seek that?
I didn't know what psychoanalysis was, and I had no particular interest, but it all started for me with nightmares.
Mm,
And I had a really great life at the time. I was 27, had pretty much everything I wanted, a great partner, living in New York, a great job. And yet I had these nightmares that would wake me and I'd be screaming, and it was the same nightmare over and over, slightly different version, but essentially people running after me with a needle that they would inject into me, and it would just take all my strength, and I couldn't fight them off, and they would destroy me. And that's when I would wake up screaming. And I really paid no attention. I would just get up and go back to sleep. But my partner said one day, people don't wake up twice, three times a week screaming with nightmares. And it never occurred to me that there was something wrong.
yeah.
I just thought if I could function in the day, I was fine. And I went to find a therapist who turned out to be a psychoanalyst. And we started out with regular therapy where I would just tell her about my life and what I thought were my issues. And we came back over and over to that dream. And I think the dream work is very much a part of psychoanalysis, not so much in therapy.
Hmm.
And I was very unaware of what dreams were about or what my psyche was. Who even knew you had a psyche? And um, and in the process of it took about 6 months of coming back to that dream over and over, and the needles. And she would tell me to go ask my mother about my early, early life as a child when my father died when I was 2, a long and difficult death from cancer. We did not have a lot of money, lived in a tiny little apartment, and bingo, one day she told me how she would give him morphine injections and how she would fix them in the kitchen and practice before she went to actually plunge the needle into his arm. And I was 2. I saw that, 2 year
Yeah.
olds. I really understood it when I had a 2 year old and saw how observant she was. And my mother had always said, if I asked her a question about my father's death, she'd say, "Oh, you were children. You didn't know anything about it." And I think that's very standard fare in a lot of
Yeah.
families.
Hmm.
But obviously, children do know. They take it all in. And it was in there in my body. And I think that's how a lot of people experience what gets pushed down and not and thrown into silence and even into taboo. It was, I was never to ask any questions. And I only did because my therapist sent me to. And when we determined that these morphine injections were very much a part of my very early life, she said to me, my therapist, one day, little by little, we put the story together and she connected the needles with the morphine injections and went back, made me go back, more questions. Well, he got his first diagnosis when I was born. And so, as she said to me one day, you were the angel of death in your family. And I had always felt that my mother was somehow repulsed by me. She
Hmm.
didn't want to hold me and touch me and hug me. And um, she was closer to my brother. And I really had a sense that something was wrong. And this is sort of what, we determined was going on, that I was feeling my mother's a kind of repulsion. I was feeling the terror of these needles. And my analyst, who at this point it became psychoanalysis because you can see how much deeper it went. And
Yeah.
she began to say, you were frightened of the needles. You saw your father wasting away and assumed she was giving him injections that were destroying him and
Yeah.
that maybe she would destroy you. Now, I didn't believe it. It didn't make any sense to me. Why would she want to destroy me? But after she told me that 6 months into this therapy, my nightmares stopped.
Yeah, that's
And
amazing.
as I say, that was the moment for me where I understood what the unconscious was. And there's a whole world in there. And and you need somebody who can speak to that and help you express that, which comes out through free association, lying on a couch, saying whatever comes to mind. And you
Yes.
have to surrender to this
Yes.
sort of irrational um, strange world that you find yourself in. But I was so amazed by the relief of not of understanding where these nightmares came from and what it was all about. That I had the strength. It gave me the strength to pursue it and find out more and more about my unconscious and the way it was affecting my everyday life, my decision making, all kinds of things. And I think we all have some version of that pattern where we do things in our daily life and we don't even understand why.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and that's the why is in our unconscious.
People think children don't remember it. So, how can it affect you? And how the perception of what you are taking in at that age, and how the perception of what's happening affects you
Hmm.
down the road.
Hmm.
Maybe not exactly the truth of what was happening, because I guess your mom was, trying to help him. But in your eyes, the perception of it was that she was hurting him because of what you were seeing, how he reacted, and how that gets stored as an adult, like in your
Hmm.
dreams and stuff. That's just so interesting. What is the difference between traditional therapy and psychoanalysis in a nutshell for those of us
So
that
this,
don't know?
yeah, this is an example of it, where you in therapy you work out your problems, you become aware of patterns, and you try and use your conscious understanding of these patterns. Let's say you choose the wrong boyfriends all the time, or you have terrible difficulties with work and failure, and whatever these patterns are, and you don't know why they're happening. You get a lot of help and support for your confidence and so on. But it probably, for me, for example, I had tried therapy throughout my life a couple of times, different times. At one point, for example, I was having difficulty with my teenage daughter, who doesn't, and and I wanted help. And when I was discussing it with the therapist, who was very behavior oriented, if you do this, she'll react this way, and you'll get a better outcome if you do this. But I kept coming back to my own mother and how it related to how my mother treated me. And she did not want to go there. She said, leave that aside. Let's just talk about how you can make your relationship
Mm,
better.
wow.
And I think analysis goes into the past and really invites you to go as deep as you can go if that's where the answers are. For me, they were. So in that situation, for example, underneath my difficulties with my daughter and the way I would behave with her, what I had to understand is it was coming from a deep-seated fear that she wouldn't love me anymore if I was strict with her or set those boundaries or expected something specific of her. And I couldn't do it. I was operating out of a fear I didn't even know I had until I explored the fact that I had always been afraid my mother wouldn't love me. Going back to that sense of her feeling repulsed by me, and also that she was just a very aloof woman who
Mm,
wasn't warm and cozy and affectionate, and that I had projected that onto my daughter. And once I understood that, and my analyst said to me, children love their parents. Why wouldn't she love you? That again, it was one of those eureka moments.
yeah.
I never thought of that. I was always just in my own tangled world of fear that other people wouldn't love me. And I could never assume that people would love me back. So that's analysis. It takes you into that deeper level of the psyche really operating all the time, and you don't see it. Well, if people have not been traumatized, then maybe they don't need to go that deep. Therapy may be just fine. But
Yeah.
for me, it wasn't. I was too tangled up, and I had to kind of go down in there to
Yeah.
find the answers. Yeah.
How was that with your background as being a professor and kind of, um, left-brained, trying to access that imaginary world, that inner
Yeah.
world? How was
Yeah.
that difficult to do?
So difficult. And you hit the nail on the head. I had kind of hidden in my intellectual world because that didn't feel so bad to me. I didn't have to confront the fears that people wouldn't love me or anything. I was very focused on work and on achievement. And I also approached other people in a very intellectual way. I was so afraid that they wouldn't love me back, or that I was afraid of really knowing how much I loved the people I loved, that I kept people at a distance. And again, that was my pattern.
Yeah.
I didn't know I was doing that. I only experienced them as not being close with me, but really I was keeping them away. And one of the things that happens in psychoanalysis that does not happen in therapy is transference. And what happened with my analyst is I began to keep her at a distance.
Mm,
And and as she began to point out, I would every time she got tried to get close to me or express affection for me, I would say, you hardly know me. We don't know each other. I'm paying you for this. I just wanted her to help me interpret dreams and get on with it.
yeah.
And and in that relationship, gradually, I saw how I kept the world away from me, and then felt it as the world staying away from me instead of me doing it.
Mm.
So that's, again, that's the level of analysis, the psyche with dream work, free association. That's how you find it, and with your relationship with your analyst. And again, that's different from therapy, where it's not focused on your relationship with your analyst. It's focused on, you know, support the analyst's support of you, which is pretty consistent. So it's a different thing that's going on.
How long do you think it kind of took you to get to that breakthrough where you kind of were trusting the process more?
My analyst, actually, I quote it in the book. She said to me, "It's taken you 2 years to see me as someone who wants to help you and care about you. You just kept me at bay." I i i would reject her offerings of care and love. And you know the way I saw it, we were two people working on my psyche.
Hmm.
We were a little team of of I wanted her interpretations, not her emotions. But the truth is, of course, I wanted her emotions.
Yeah.
We want people to like us. We want people to care, to be engaged. We gradually become engaged with them. Where humans are made for love.
Yeah.
They're made for connection. We're
Yeah.
born with it.
Yeah. I think because you kept going back, obviously
Yeah.
you were wanting that
Yeah.
and but not trusting it, it sounds like.
Well, and not even acknowledging it
Yeah.
until, it was 2 years in, and I just fell into the understanding. I had a vacation. I just took a vacation. I wanted to go on a trip to Alaska. I was gone for 2 months, and I panicked. I needed her. And
Oh,
it was
wow.
the first, that's how it happened. It was the first time I acknowledged how much I cared about her, needed to be near her, with her, hear her. And that was 2 years in. That's how
Wow.
long it took.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Mhm.
So you've said that healing isn't always comfortable or pretty. What was the most surprising or even messy part of your healing journey that you feel like others kind of avoid or don't want to talk about?
The hardest part was what I just told you. I mean, for me, this was something I avoided all my life. It was so painful to me to see who I was inside, as somebody who was very dependent on another person now. This stranger who I was paying, suddenly she was so important to me. I felt needy and vulnerable, and um, I had to go through all the fears that she wouldn't be there for me, that she'd leave me, that she'd go away, that she would say, "I can't work with you anymore." And all of those things were horribly painful to me. And I had always sort of been able to avoid them in my life by my intellectual distances, but I acted them out. So over and over, I would find myself having all kinds of emotions about my friends, that um, my fear that they weren't going to be there the next time I called, or if they didn't call me back quickly enough, they don't love me anymore. So I was experiencing it, but not really acknowledging it. So
Mm,
I couldn't work on it. But once I began, and I began to allow myself to have all the feelings I had for my analyst, um, it was kind of torture. I really had never I I never allowed myself to feel that way towards my mother. That's really the central point, because my mother was not an affectionate person. She was not um, reassuring. So so I never dared to need her in those
yeah.
ways. And what was coming out was the part of me I had rejected because it was too dangerous as a child to
Yeah.
feel those feelings. And I think, again, a lot of people have areas of their life that they can't acknowledge, um, or don't understand. Uh, such as, for example, I mean, a common kind of like women who maybe choose the wrong partners and they wonder how is that happening. There's something in their lives, their early lives, that it, is they're not understanding. Their psyche is in control, and something back there seemed to go over and over and over trying to get love from, let's say, a man or a partner that never works out. Where did that patterning begin? How did it get planted in the psyche? What's making that behavior happen? And those
Yeah.
are very painful things to recognize. That's why you're not aware of them. You
Yeah.
know, you're
How scary was it to try and be vulnerable in relationships? And what did that look like as went through maybe with your husband or your daughter?
well, well, oddly enough, in my life, my husband was my one safe person. I always knew we'd be there for each other. I never worried he'd leave me. My analyst even said he was the one person I trusted unconditionally.
Mm.
Why? I'm not sure, but I think it's because the one person in my life who I trusted in my soul was my older brother. And he was a model for me of, I knew he loved me. He would laugh at my jokes. He would protect me. I mean, he would, if anybody had tried to hurt me on the streets of New York or whatever, where I grew up, he would have come to my defense in a second. He was always trying to teach me things. He tried to make me ready for the world. And when he went off to college, he would bring me home books. You read this, he would say. And um, I really felt loved by him. And so I think I automatically trusted, a man who in many ways resembled him, who I chose, someone who was that rock solid, decent person who was very loving to women.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I trusted him. So it
Yeah.
didn't act out there, but
Okay.
the vulnerability, I was able to bring that home and admit much more than I had ever done before why I behaved, when I felt hurt, what was upsetting me. And I saw how in our relationship I had been very controlling
Mm.
because I was actually trying to control my psyche and all of these emotions. But the only way I knew to do that was to control my environment, my life.
Yeah.
So I had to choose all of our vacations. I had to choose how we set up the household. I had to choose how we raised our daughter. And the vulnerability came through with a marvelous lifting of that control. And he was right there ready for it and grateful for it. He is an easygoing guy. So he let that happen, the control. And I was always very respectful of
Hmm.
him and his needs. But this was a wonderful change in our relationship when I was able to let go of a lot of my fears. I didn't have to hold on to my life so tightly. Um, and it's such a pleasure to live without those kinds of anxieties. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was a big plus,
Yeah. I was
very
going to
big
say it
plus.
sounds very freeing, but scary too at the same time. I mean,
It was so scary. I had never lived without the strictures and controls and compulsions. I'm one of those, very obsessive compulsive people. Everything has to be, because I didn't have outside reassurances from my
mhm.
parents. Um, I mean, they always told me you could, do anything you want, be anything you want, but they couldn't really help me. And I was out there on my own more than I was really capable of. And so I had to kind of try and exert all these controls in my life because I was really scared underneath that I
Yeah.
wasn't prepared or wasn't ready. And now I can see how life flows. But the scary part of coming to know the vulnerability that's inside you, that's very frightening. When it started to pour out of me in analysis, and it did so over a period of years. Um, I had to I mean I had to have all kinds of transitional objects, like little kids, toddlers have their teddy bears. I had versions of teddy bears. Um, I would have I would have music that I would listen to obsessively that would calm me when I was having these just incredible upsets about how vulnerable I felt. Like I couldn't stand it, feeling
Yeah.
I had really not allowed myself to feel that way. I was tough, and I expected toughness of the people around me. And with my students, for example, I used to be known as a really tough professor. You had your papers in on time, you came to class prepared, I was really, and I saw it as having high expectations of my students. Um, but really, what happened was more and more, I began to see if I allowed them, if I was incredibly trusting of them and let them, if they had to get a late paper in, no problem, tell me all about it. What happened in your life? I became this very maternal, loving teacher,
Wow.
and I got even better results than being a kind of military professor.
Right.
So that's how it affected my life and the lives of the people around me.
Yeah. So you were talking about how tough it got and you had some coping mechanisms. What kept you going? What kept you from quitting in those hard moments?
Yeah, for one thing, I had an analyst who was warm and caring and really smart in her interpretations of my life. And that was so illuminating. It was so enlightening that you come back for more, even though it's scary. You kind of know, or at least I knew, that health was right there.
Mm,
And that even if it was hard, there was something in that consulting room that was nourishing me in a way that I had never been nourished and was
yeah.
untangling me. That's why I named my book Untangling. And the
How would
relief was
you,
great. Yeah.
how would, how would someone know if they're ready for psychoanalysis or going deeper?
I think the way that they know, there are a few very concrete things. If you begin work with therapy, I mean, there are many therapists who are also trained as analysts, and their practice may be mostly just therapy with maybe two or three analysins, they're called, people who are in analysis, because it's very demanding of the therapist. So there are many people who do both. But if you're in therapy and you have a kind of frustration, the way I
Mm,
did, with a therapist who isn't allowing you to go into a place where you think you need to go in order to understand how you're relating to your child or how you're relating to your partner, or that there's something that or just that they're not investigating this fear that's underneath you, um, or the nature of the depression that you feel, um, and you kind of know that there's something missing.
mhm.
That's one thing. Another thing is if the therapist isn't helping you to resolve your problems, they may be too tangled up, to use that word again, for mere therapy. And again, there are a lot of analysts who not only do analysis, but who can if they can't do it with you, um, in the institutes where they train analysts, there are training analysts, young analysts in training, who you can work with for a much lower price than someone who has many, many years of
Hmm.
experience. And my first analyst was exactly that. I was 27, she probably was 30, and she had a tape recorder and taped all my sessions because she had to discuss them with her supervisor.
Yeah.
But it was $25 a session,
Wow.
and that's what I could afford. So it worked. And so that's something to consider if you want to look into this. And it depends on how much you feel you're missing in your life. You know, how maybe how anxious you feel, and you don't think you need to feel that way. Or for me, I had a wonderful life, and yet I would fall into these depressions
Mm.
very easily if something went wrong. And that doesn't happen anymore. And I think if people are not making progress with those kinds of issues, it may be worth looking into a more detailed kind of therapy.
Yeah, I do somatic therapy. I have a practice here in town, and this resonates a lot with what I do as well. A lot of the things that you're saying, um, and how exactly the people I'm looking for or that are right have already tried other modalities,
That's right.
EMDR or, talk therapy, and they just feel like there's still something there. There's still something there. So,
Yeah, and to your point, my analyst at a certain point sent me to somatic therapy,
yeah.
but you do want to try other modalities when the one that you're using doesn't address a particular problem.
I love when there's some collaboration
Yeah,
with your team,
that's right.
that your person doesn't think, "Oh, I'm gonna fix you,
Yeah,
I got
yeah,
this."
yeah,
When they realize that maybe this is out of my scope and they're able to,
yeah,
send you to somebody else. That's when
that's
you know you
right.
have a good therapist.
That's very true. And by the way, she sent me to EMDR before somatic, which and the EMDR just didn't speak to me at all.
Mm,
And she's very, let's experiment here. Let's
yeah.
see how to solve this problem.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Hmm.
I always say everybody has their own healing combination,
That's
and
right.
that combination changes as you evolve and grow, and you can grow out of a certain modality, or like you said, it
Yeah.
might not fit or feel right for you.
Hmm.
But it's out there, so keep
Yeah.
looking. Just keep
Yeah.
looking. So you talk about the power of telling our stories, even the painful ones. Why do you think that's so important?
I think it goes back to the first question you asked me and the silence that so many families have about what really is going on or has gone on in their lives. Um, and I think we, as children, carry that silence with us. And telling our stories is a way of breaking that very painful silence and normalizing what's happened to you. I spoke with one woman, for example, who she and her sister would go to find their father who was drinking in a bar with his friends all the time, and they would drag him home for dinner, and he was drunk, and the two of them learned to never even speak about what they were doing at 8 years old, being sent by the mother, and how that affected them. And I think they learned that their mother was too upset by this. She was so trying to have a normal family. And she didn't, her way of handling it, like my mother, was let's never mention it again. So I had a father who died when I was 2. We never spoke his name again.
Mm,
We never saw a picture, never mentioned. It didn't happen. And I think that so many people, when they begin to tell their story, the relief is tremendous because you're saying what couldn't be said and had to be expressed through your body or through destructive behaviors or your own addictions or whatever it is. And suddenly you put it into words and you realize how many other people have had the
Mm,
same situation. In this case, the two sisters were able to talk about it. My brother and I can talk about it. And it's only really since I wrote this book and he read it that we have been talking with each other in a certain sense nonstop. It's given us permission to
yes.
really talk about what happened to us, not to blame. It's not the blame game. It's to say that really affected us. That was really hard. And to remember together what the details were. If you have someone who you can tell about it or to share it with, who was there as well, a sibling or a neighbor or a best friend from childhood, um, it has an incredible healing effect.
Yeah, definitely. That whole validation and the freedom to speak of things
Yeah,
that you don't think that you're supposed to talk about.
that's right.
It's like, wait, we're not supposed to talk about that.
Yeah,
I know I felt that way when I started diving into the adoptee community. I found some Facebook groups and I was like, oh, this will be fun. I'll join an adoptee group. And then I was like, they're bringing up all kinds of stuff and I'm like, oh, supposed to talk about that. What are we doing
yeah.
here? But then it was so freeing for me to be able to explore how do I feel about that too.
Oh, uh-huh.
So that opened up a lot for me. And that's why I had done 2 years of the podcast talking to adoptees after that.
Yeah,
I'm like, we need to educate the world. Like there's adoptees out there that feel totally alone. Like we need to tell them that because we all felt that way. We felt like we were the
yeah,
only ones adopted.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I was
That's
like, we need to put
exactly
this
what
out
I'm
into the
talking.
world. Yeah.
That's it. That's it. And how has that changed your life just to be able
Yeah.
to talk
Oh,
about it?
in so many ways.
Yeah.
So many ways. I mean,
Hmm.
I can't even start, but part of that was doing my somatic therapy, that I was doing for myself. And that brought up a lot of stuff, a lot of
Hmm.
healing,
Hmm.
between my birth mother, and how I felt about her relinquishing me in the first place. And, because we always had kind of a tumultuous relationship where she would keep rejecting me and then come back and say sorry. And then, so I was getting rejected kind of over and over and over again by
Oh.
her,
Mm.
without realizing that the trauma that she went through and
Hmm.
that she was
Hmm.
operating from her lived experience. And
That's right.
once I realized that, it changed everything for me,
Hmm.
you know.
Hmm.
But
You
if I
know,
wouldn't have done therapy, I wouldn't have gotten that
that's
deep. I wouldn't
right.
have gone that deep. Yeah.
But you bring up such an important point, which is once you start exploring, it gives you more compassion for other people,
Yes.
even people who hurt you.
Yeah.
You see them as the victims of their circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It turns
absolutely.
it turns it from it's my fault
That's right.
to it's
That's
not
right.
my fault. It's
That's right.
just from their lived experience. And that's so freeing, so freeing. What did you find in your relationship with your analyst? Um, what did you value most about that relationship?
I valued her warmth, her caring, and her intelligence. And by warmth and caring, what is so striking for a patient in that relationship is that you can act out. I mean, I could get mad at her, I could withdraw from her, all of my usual,
Tactics.
tools for uh, distancing and all of that. And she would remain consistent. And I had not had that. I wouldn't have dared to behave in that way as a child. I couldn't do that. I mean, I would have meltdowns, but they would be about, I don't know, like, why don't I comb my hair differently, from my mother? And then I'd yell at my mother. It was not the real subjects. We weren't talking about what really hurt us or upset us. And with my analyst, she would hold on, stay with me if I got angry or whatever, until we unpacked it, as she would say. And then it was a revelation about what was underneath this particular emotional withdrawal or anger or upset, whatever it was. Um, and I think that that was magic to me. That was the healing, that somebody could be um, non-reactive.
Mm,
She didn't let me push her away. She didn't let me, if I withdrew from her, she was there when I came back.
yeah,
And that in itself, you learn that people can relate in a very loving way like that.
right. Has your understanding of trauma evolved since writing the book, even?
Yes, enormously. I went at the beginning, I know that trauma to me was being locked in a basement or being beaten by your alcoholic stepfather or, something awful.
Hmm.
And what I learned is it can be very ordinary. My parents were good parents in many ways. They bought us Christmas presents. I always had clean laundry in my drawers. If something was really wrong, they were right there, medically or whatever. Um, but they weren't warm and loving in the way that I know I tried to parent.
Mm,
They just didn't have it. They were people whose own lives were very difficult in many ways, and they just didn't have the luxury of raising children that way. And what I learned is that not having that kind of warmth and tenderness and reassurance is itself trauma. To have a
mm,
parent who's um, depressed or withdrawn or unable to spontaneously respond to your joy as a child, um, I think that's trauma. And my mother was dealing with a dying and dead husband at age 26 with
mm.
two little children. Maybe she wasn't ready for the joys of parenting.
Yeah,
And she had a terrible financial burden on her hands.
yeah,
So, you know, I understand that that's trauma. And
yeah,
it really shaped my life without my knowing it.
right,
I thought everything's fine. My mother married somebody else. We moved on, as she said, and you just get on with it like she
right.
did. That's
Yeah,
how she had to deal.
right.
So, just get tough, she would
Yeah.
tell me. Got to be
Mm,
tough.
wow. So if your healing journey had a message for someone who's struggling or feeling tangled, um, what would that message be?
The message would be a way of putting it is turn the light on yourself and go back to that childhood and say, how did that affect me?
Hmm.
And start to trust what you find in looking at your family experience as a child. Really, really paying some attention to how did that affect me? How did it make me feel? Even if you think it's wrong that you were, maybe your parents told you that you were um, too needy, to just stop it, stop asking for things, stop asking for more hugs or whatever. To go back there, how did that make you feel? If your parent had high expectations and you had to have A's on your report card and join every team and be good at whatever sport, how did that make you feel?
Hmm.
And you'll be able to untangle
Yeah.
so much on your even on your own,
Hmm.
even on your own, I think.
Yeah. That's a
Yeah.
great place to start. And I have that in my practice as well. I have my clients write a list of what did your childhood tell you about yourself?
Yeah.
What did
Yeah.
you learn about or what labels did you put on yourself,
Yeah. Those are
from
great. Those are absolutely
yeah, and
wonderful.
and again, that's like those are those programs that are running in the background that you don't even
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
are running,
That's
and
right.
you put it down on paper and see it, and it's just like, whoa, I didn't even think about that, or
Right.
that it should be affecting me anymore.
That's right. That's so important. I think it should. I've grown up. I shouldn't be affected by that. You are.
Yeah.
You
It
know,
happened when I was 2 years old. Why am I saying I?
yeah.
Yeah.
But the psyche does not forget. The body does not
No,
forget.
it does
And
not.
yeah, if you wanna be free, I think you have to take a good
Yeah.
look at your psyche.
Hmm. Well, where can we find you and your book and anything else that's going on with you? Where can we find you?
So, first thing is my book is on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles, and you can buy it there. It's in Kindle and book form, and also I have a website with all kinds of with interviews and essays I've done and so on. I also have a blog that I do for Psychology Today,
Mm,
and I have done two blogs already. But you can find me at untanglingjoan.com. That's my website, and it's got
perfect.
all the information there.
Yeah, we will have that in the show notes. Thanks so much for coming on today. I totally enjoyed this conversation. Um, and again, just thank you for being vulnerable and writing about your story. And like we were saying, how important it is to tell our stories so that others feel validated and not so alone. It's so, so important. So
Yes,
thank you so much for
yes.
coming on today.
And thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed this conversation too.
Thank you. I absolutely loved this conversation with Joan. I hope something she shared really landed with you. Maybe even gave you a little hope that the knots that you're feeling right now can be untangled. It might take time, but it is possible. The links to Joan and her book are in the show notes. And hey, if you're ready to explore your own healing journey in a deeper way, especially through the body, I'd love to support you with the somatic work that I do. You can always find me at somatichealingjourneys.com. There's more info there about how we can work together. Also, if you are someone who has a unique or out of the box healing modality and think you'd be a good fit for the show, I would love to hear from you. Just shoot me an email at mindyourownkarma@gmail.com. Let me know what you do and how it helps people. And let's get you on the podcast. All right, Karma Crew, until next time, take what you need and leave what you don't. And always remember to mind your own karma. I'll see you next time.